Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 287. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Returning to the show today is Dave DeCamp. Dave's the news editor at antiwar.com. You can find him at DeCampDave on Twitter, and of course is a fan favorite guest of the show. So if you want to share today's show, you can find it at the Libertarian Institute on the blog at antiwar.com. You can listen to the show anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts and on the Libertarian Institute all podcast feed. For video version, Rumble, Odysee, and YouTube are the places you could go to subscribe, and you could donate to the show at Patreon, Subscribestar, or through crypto. All that information in the show notes page. The last way you can help out the show is by supporting our sponsor, Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code PEACE, home to a great selection of high-quality CBD products. We've had a long-standing partnership with Paloma Verde at Conflicts of Interest. Every listener who tells me that they've used the promo code tells me they've really liked the products that they've gotten. A lot of people lately have been recommending their CBD dog treats as being excellent for their pets, even either to help their pets have a little bit less energy and maybe anxiety and excitement, or for their older dogs to help them get around a little bit better. So you got a dog, you want a little bit of help with that dog, there might be something that can help you out. Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. All right, here's the episode with Dave DeCamp. Hey Dave, how's it going? Welcome back to the show.
Good, Kyle. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, well, happy to have you on today because you have been doing a lot of writing. You've been staying very busy at antiwar.com. And so I'm going to try to cover a few of your recent articles with you today. But of course, I always appreciate some of your overall and larger perspectives, especially with the great power competition, China and Russia, where you're writing so much. So the first one I was kind of wondering about what's going on is with Finland and Sweden's NATO bid. It seemed like they really wouldn't hit any resistance, but they did. And Turkey continues to say that we're not budging on the issue, and then Sweden seems to have kind of put themselves in a problematic corner. So what's happening here, Dave?
Yeah, so this is pretty interesting because, like you said, even when Turkey kind of first objected to Sweden and Finland joining, I didn't really think much of it. I thought they were trying to get some concessions out of the U.S. and NATO, maybe. But it seems like they really have some gripes with them over their support for Kurdish groups, in northeast Syria and in Turkey. So Turkish and Swedish and Finnish officials, they met recently, maybe it was last week, and Turkey gave them their demands. Basically, they accused Sweden and Finland of supporting the PKK, which is a militant Kurdish group that Turkey, as well as the U.S. and the EU, consider to be a terrorist organization. It's one of those similar situations with, Iraq and Syria. You cross the border into Turkey, and the U.S. considers the Kurds to be terrorists, but in northeast Syria, they're our allies, and we're backing them and sending them tons of weapons and stuff. So Turkey wants them to make some serious changes. But this was pretty interesting. This week, the Swedish government survived a no that was prompted. It was against the Swedish government's justice minister. It was sparked over, apparently, there's a rise in gang violence in Sweden, and they're not happy with the way the justice minister is handling it. To survive the vote, the Swedish government, the ruling Social Democrats, they needed the support of this one MP who's independent, and she's Kurdish. She's of Kurdish ancestry, and to get her vote, they had to agree not to give in to Turkey's demands, on the Kurds, which is pretty interesting. And last November, this Kurdish MP got the Social Democrats to agree to increase support with the Democratic Union Party, which is a Kurdish group in northeast Syria, which is considered the Syrian affiliate of the PKK, to increase cooperation with them. So the Swedish government said this week that that deal is still on. So it's kind of a big signal that they're, at least this government is not going to give in to Turkey's demands to join NATO. And so it's kind of really complicated things. Again, with these parliamentary governments, things can change very quickly. New government could come in pretty rapidly, but for now, it seems like they're not gonna give in to Turkey's demands, which is good. But it is interesting because it seems like the U.S. and NATO officials are acting like Turkey's objection isn't a big deal. But Turkey's Erdogan and his foreign minister have been very clear that they're not going to lift their objection unless they really make some changes.
So I guess one question I have is Turkey has a lot of geopolitical ambitions. Syria, the Kurds within Turkey, they're waging a military campaign in northern Iraq right now. They have a lot of energy interest in the Eastern Mediterranean and their geopolitical control over the Eastern Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea and things like, and also then their territorial disputes and issues with Greece. And so I guess there's a lot of like maybe ground for the U.S. or the West to make concessions to Turkey. And so maybe are they going to make them in other places, or do you think that this really is the Kurdish issue is their core issue at this point?
It seems like the Kurdish issue is the big issue, and there's also Sweden and Finland put sanctions on Turkey. They're like export controls in 2019 when they launched an offensive against the Kurds in northeast Syria. So I think that's part of it too, but that's also related to the Kurds. And now Erdogan seems to be gearing up for another offensive into that area. So that's not going to help the situation. And according to Turkish officials, they've just from reports I've read, they've been saying that, they want to get back into the F-35 program that they were kicked out of because they bought Russian, I believe it was the S-400 air defense missiles. And but they said that they're not going to link that to Sweden and Finland joining NATO. That's a separate issue to them, which, might not really be true, but it does seem like the Kurdish thing is the main issue here.
Yeah, so I guess one other question I had is have you noticed this having any impact? Because Turkey has been maybe, and I guess it's hard to find another state that has been more working hard to facilitate the diplomacy between Ukraine and Russia to try to bring an end to this conflict. So is there any indication that Turkey consenting is going to harm its relationship with Moscow, or, of course, being against it, it would harm its relationship with Ukraine in such a way that it really wouldn't be able to mediate these talks going forward? Or does everybody kind of seem to be okay in just allowing, Turkey to cast whatever vote they want here? This was one of my big concerns about any new countries joining NATO is it's going to potentially take away Ukraine's perceived neutral status.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like I'm sure Russia is happy that Turkey is, blocking them from joining, but it doesn't seem like it's a major issue for them right now. And with Ukraine, I haven't seen them. I could have missed this, but I haven't seen really any Ukrainian officials say much about this situation with Turkey and Sweden and Finland. So I'm not sure, but I know Turkey, they've been pretty involved in trying to get Ukrainian grain exports moving. Lavrov, foreign minister, was just in Turkey on Wednesday talking about that. So they're still, trying to mediate between the two sides because that will take an agreement between Ukraine and Russia to get those ships moving because Ukraine needs to agree to demine its ports. But they're saying, oh, we can't do that because then Russia's going to, launch an attack or attack Odessa. So they need to reach a consensus to get that stuff moving.
So can we talk about this in a little bit more detail, because it's just a topic that I've unfortunately neglected on the show over the past couple of weeks, is these discussions around potentially allowing ships to bring grain from Ukraine to the rest of the world. And do you know, because I if you look at just like the Western press, is all the Russian blockade, the Russian blockade, the Russian blockade. But if you look into it a little bit, the mines in the port are at least one barrier to this. And so how much of this is, the Russia's blockade, and are the Ukrainian mines just a response to that, or are the Ukrainian mines a little bit of a separate issue?
I would say it's a separate issue. I mean, so the Russia is, I guess, blockading the ports. I mean, the Russian Navy is in the Black Sea, and it's kind of surrounding Ukraine's ports, but they're also full of mines. Russia demined the port of Mariupol recently and said that it's open to civil traffic. I haven't really seen if many ships have been going in and out of there since then. But yeah, it's more complicated than just Russia is blockading the ports. Ukraine isn't letting ships leave because they hiked up their maritime security level to MARSEC level 3, which basically means everything's shut down and nothing can move. There's 3 MARSEC levels, 1, 2, and 3. 3 is the highest, and ports are supposed to be shut down when it's in that level. And now, sure, they have their reasons to not let ships go in and out. I was just reading about Odessa. They closed public beaches because there's so many mines in the waters that Ukraine has. They need to demine the ports for grain ships to leave. And now they're talking about having this humanitarian corridor for ships that the UN might be involved, Turkey might be involved. And at first I was kind of alarmed when I heard that plan because it sounded like Western military intervention to open the port. But right now, with the way Turkey and Russia have been coordinating it, I think it'll probably be, if they do it, it'll probably be Turkish ships. And they're going to escort them down to the Bosphorus Strait, which connects Mediterranean Sea and Black Sea. And yeah, Turkey's a NATO country, but if they're doing that, Russia's not going to, they're making a real deal with Russia. It's not going to spark anything. There's also the other side of it. Russia is saying, Russia could, they're definitely, they definitely could cooperate more, I think, to get these exports going. It's not like it's all Ukraine's fault. I mean, Russia did start the war. They're also saying, the U.S. has to lift, the West needs to lift sanctions on Russian shipping because that's preventing our grain and our wheat, from being exported. And this is all playing into the kind of food shortages that we're starting to see.
Yeah. So let's move on a little bit. And you had this article from yesterday that's really important and really caught a lot of people's attention, titled "Ukraine Not Giving U.S. Much Information About Its Operations Against Russia." And how is this possible? I guess, seems to be the question on everyone's mind, where if the U.S. is giving Ukraine all this military aid, how is it possible that we don't know a lot of information about their military operations? It seems, given the amount of military aid that has come from the U.S. to Ukraine, if there's any monitoring of that military equipment at all, we would have to have a pretty good idea of what the battlefield looks like.
Yeah, this is a pretty this is almost hard to believe that apparently, according to this report and the U.S. officials that spoke to the New York Times, Ukraine has not been really sharing details of its military operations with the U.S. It says it's given them few, briefings on their operations. It says even in high-level meetings with Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, and General Milley, that they're talking about their war strategy, but not so much their operations or what's happening on the ground. And, we've seen publicly Ukrainian officials have just been making claims about the Russian side. Until recently, Zelensky said they're losing between 60 and 100 troops each day in the east there. But that was just last week or the week before. Up till then, it was really closely guarded secret how many Ukrainian troops are dying, and apparently, according to this report, it's not clear to the U.S. either. It says the U.S. has to rely on other countries that are operating in Ukraine, which is interesting because what other countries are there in there that are operating there? And it has to base it on kind of Zelensky's public comments, which is pretty unbelievable to me that we're sending them billions in weapons and apparently they're not They're not telling us really what they're doing with those weapons. And we know from other reports that, there's zero oversight with these weapons. And when they enter Ukraine, the U.S. doesn't know where they're going, which seems so reckless, especially now that we're sending them these rocket systems that can hit targets up to 50 miles away. And they got these assurances, they say, from Ukrainian officials. Oh, we won't use them to hit Russian territory. But, you know, whose hands are that? We don't know what militia is going to get a hold of them. What mercenaries might get a hold of them. And there's really no control there. So it's really, I think this report really shows just how reckless it is. It also might be, maybe some U.S. intelligence officials trying to get ahead of what it looks like it's going to be a pretty bad defeat of Ukraine, at least in the Donbass region. Russia has been making slow gains, but there have been steady gains, and they're clearly winning the war on the ground there. And kind of just to blame it on Ukraine for a possible intelligence failure, because they did paint the picture after the Russia withdrew from around Kiev that Ukraine could win, and but now that the war has been focused in this part of the country, it's clear that Russia is making some pretty serious gains.
Right. And so with the Russian gains, Dave, we have heard, from Ukrainian officials over the past couple weeks that the Ukrainian position is that they are going to reclaim all of Ukraine's territory, and Zelensky has even specified that that would go back to the territory claimed in 2014. And so it seems that that if this is even possible, that the Ukrainian government's position is getting further from reality as Russia, rather than, bending a little bit on the territorial concessions because now Russia controls more of Ukraine. They're doing the opposite, and they're saying that, no, we're planning still to drive Russia out of the Crimean Peninsula. And it does seem that they're at least getting some encouragement on this from, if not the US, definitely the UK government.
Yeah, I mean, Zelensky, he said a few times this week that their goal is to, the occupation of Ukrainian territory, which means driving Russia out of Crimea, which is not a realistic goal, and driving them out of the Donbass. I mean, it's going to take a serious offensive from Ukraine to do this. And I don't know enough if they have, the manpower to launch a real counteroffensive right now, or if because they're losing so many troops right now. And we started to see in the last few weeks reports from mainstream media that it's really a bad situation right now for the Ukrainian troops on the front lines of this war. They're being sent there with not enough weapons. They're being sent there with weapons they don't know how to use. They barely have any food. There was one article, I think it was Washington Post, about a volunteer brigade that they were living on a potato a day, and they felt like they were abandoned by the politicians in Kiev. So it's hard to believe that this force is going to be able to launch any kind of counteroffensive. But that's what it seems like the U.S. is egging on by sending all these weapons. They're sending 4 of those rocket systems, and Ukraine's saying they need at least 60 to beat Russia. So that's a lot. But Biden has a lot of money to spend on Ukraine right now from that $40 billion bill he signed. So
now, you mentioned there's the U.S. systems. Well, I guess they're both U.S. systems, but there's the HIMARS. Those are the ones that the Biden administration said they were sending. And then the UK is sending the M270s, which have about a similar range and are both made by the U.S. So even the UK weapons had to receive U.S. approval. When I initially, read about the UK sending those weapons, unlike when the Biden administration sent them, there was no concern in the UK government to give any kind of clarification that these weapons cannot be used inside of Russia. Now, of course, this gets complicated if we're talking about Crimea because, one side considers it Russia and the other side doesn't. But
Mhm.
did you see any kind of assurances that the UK government got, or that the US government got from the UK government before they're sending these? And I don't know, it seems like maybe a potential loophole that some of these systems will be used to carry out attacks inside of Russia. And of course, I'm sure you saw that Sergei Lavrov was making particular threats as the Russian foreign minister related to these systems.
Yeah, I did read an article in The Guardian that said the UK received assurances, similar assurances that the US did, that they wouldn't use these weapons to attack Russian territory. But like I said, these assurances don't really mean that much when they don't know where the weapons are going, whose hands they're ending up in. And then that's a good point, too. If they use them to attack Crimea, if their goal right now is to drive Ukraine, is to drive Russia out of Crimea, then what's to stop them from using the rockets on that territory? And Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, he said the other day that Ukraine should not drop its goal of driving Russia out of Crimea, because there's been more talk of Ukraine ceding territory to Russia to end the war, and that was Stoltenberg's response. And he's also saying we have to be prepared for the long haul, to support Ukraine for the long haul. So at least he recognizes that if that is the goal, I mean, this is going to be a very long, drawn-out war. But yeah, it almost sounds like he's encouraging them to keep that goal.
It certainly seems like it. So I guess I want to ask you about that next, but before I jump off there, I just wanted to ask what was your impression of the Russian offensive? It seems that maybe the more limited campaign that they had against cities like Kiev in the beginning of the invasion, they've been far more you do what is necessary to take all the territory in the Donbass, right? That this has been, there's been significant like destruction to Ukrainian cities and things like that at this point. But just wondering what your overall take is like on the battlefield. You say Russia's making small gains. Of course, if you read some Western media, you kind of only get the impression that Russia is losing soldiers and that the Ukrainians are essentially holding firm, but maybe giving just a little bit of territory.
Yeah, I think we've seen that narrative kind of start to collapse. I'm not following the battlefield developments too closely because it is hard to tell exactly what's happening. But yeah, it seems like it's been a very brutal offensive, and that a lot of people are dying on both sides, I think. And I think even Zelensky's 60 to 100 troops dying each day might be on the low side. I mean, yeah, it just seems like it's been really brutal. So yeah, and I see it. I think it says Russia said yesterday that they control 97% of the Luhansk Oblast, which is half of the Donbass region, and again, slow, because the week before it was about 94%, and that was according to Western sources. So they're not disputing that Russia pretty much controls that entire territory. And in Donetsk, I'm not sure the exact number, but they're pretty close to controlling that whole area too. And then now you have, if you look at the map of the territory that Russia controls, they have that land bridge, as they call it, from Crimea to Russia through these territories, through Zaporizhia, if I said that right, and Kherson, which is just north of Crimea. And there's talk among those kind of Russian-installed administrations that they put into these provinces, or of holding a referendum to join Russia, or of just asking Russia without a referendum to join. So that tells me that the longer Ukraine is holding out here, the less leverage they have, and the more territory they might lose. So I think what it's doing, and what the U.S. is encouraging, is ultimately could lead, unless they come to their senses within the next few months, could lead to Russia taking a lot more territory than they originally demanded. Because in the first month of the war, their ceasefire demands, territorial-wise, were drop your claim to Crimea and recognize the so-called, independence of the Donbass republics. But now they control a lot more territory than that.
Yeah, so I've been seeing this pop up over the past couple of weeks, and you have an article here on it, and you kind of just answered most of the question I was going to ask you next. But what do you think the Russian ambitions are here, and how much Ukrainian territory might they end up taking?
Um, I mean, I think I'm not sure what the Russian ambitions are. It's really hard to say if they have, intend to take these territories or not, or if maybe they will use them as leverage. I mean, I think they definitely want that water source to Crimea that Ukraine cut off. That's apparently back on. The canal that Ukraine blocked is flowing again, and that was a pretty major goal, I think, of this war. So, if we think of a future peace settlement, I'm sure that will be a requirement, that water will keep flowing. And if that means Russia will control more territory in the south there, we'll see. But I think, again, as time goes on, I mean, we had some Russian officials talking about taking Odessa, kind of the entire southern Ukrainian coast. As the war lasts longer, I think their territorial ambitions might grow if they don't think that they can negotiate a deal that for the territories that they have now, or the ones, or Crimea and the Donbass.
Yeah, all right, that makes sense. So what about the other side? What about the West? What is the goal here? What do they want to do? I mean, I guess that is the bigger question. How far are they willing to push this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It's tough to say. I mean, the one thing that we are seeing, which is good, is kind of the fracture in the NATO alliance. You have France and Germany and Italy now kind of calling for negotiations and resisting sending, heavy weapons. Germany keeps saying, yeah, we're going to send you some tanks and stuff, but I don't think they have yet. Scholz is under a lot of pressure, the German chancellor, domestically and from Ukraine and NATO countries. But I don't think he wants to really take that step. I think they're looking at their economies right now with these the oil ban coming, and gas is going to be next if this keeps going. And that's really gonna hurt Europe's economy. So I think we can kind of hope that those divisions will grow, and that those kind of Western European countries will get louder and louder in their opposition to what's going on. Because right now they're still, funding the war and backing it and everything. But I hope that they get stronger in their opposition. They say, no, we're not going to send any more weapons or ammunition, whatever it is they're sending right now. But then when it comes to the U.S. and the U.K. and Poland and the Baltic states, I mean, they all seem very determined for, prolonging this for as long as they can. They want to see Russia defeated in Ukraine. And for that to happen, I mean, what kind of weapons do they have to send? And how long is this going to go on? And then another big question is, in these Russian-controlled territories, if there's going to be any kind of insurgency there, we're not going to see that probably in parts of the eastern parts of the Donbass that were under the separatist control since 2014. But in these other areas, I'm not sure. It depends. And I know there's a lot of pro-Russia sentiment, but they've also have just been waging war there and destroying a lot of the country. So that will turn them against Russia. But I don't see this ending anytime soon in the sense of the West sanctions on Russia. I mean, you had John Sullivan, he's the U.S. ambassador in Russia, and he's 62 years old. And he said the other day that he doesn't think, in his lifetime that we're going to see improve there. That's a pretty bleak outlook from, the U.S. ambassador to Russia. So I think they have this is very long term in their minds right now.
So this seems all the more absurd given that they really still want their great competition battle with China too, Dave.
Yeah.
So let's. I want to ask you about this because I think it's actually really important. And it doesn't get much discussion. China, Cambodia begin construction on port, dismiss U.S. concerns. The U.S. really leaned on Cambodia to not build this port or upgrade this port with the Chinese financing, but they went ahead with it anyways. So, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good example of U.S., trying to bully and pressure countries into falling in line with their policies, and it really backfiring. So, I think it started in 2019. The U.S. funded some construction at the Ream naval base in Cambodia, the Ream port, and they apparently they knocked down some building that the U.S. built, and then they got some money from China to do this big upgrade to the port. And, we started seeing reports in Western media in 2019 that it was a secret military base. Cambodia and China deny it. The U.S. sanctioned Cambodia last year. They sanctioned Cambodian officials, and then they put an arms embargo on Cambodia for China financing these port projects and for what they say is a lack of transparency. And that just brought Cambodia and China closer together. They signed a military pact earlier this year, kind of a general, not a very specific deal, but it just said that their militaries will cooperate. And then this week they just broke ground on this upgrade to their port, on this construction project. And the Cambodian defense minister was there. He talking to the media, and he invited. There was officials from the U.S. embassy. Said, there's nothing for you to, there's nothing to see here, and it's just. I think they said they're making a new dry dock to repair ships. Extending the pier, building a hospital, things like that. They're saying it's not a secret Chinese naval base because their constitution forbids foreign bases. But yeah, the U.S. is still protesting this and saying that they're being extremely, they're lacking transparency. And, the U.S. is kind of struggling. They want to get these Southeast Asian countries on their side against China, but they don't want to pick a side. It's not so much that they want to be on China's side, it's that they don't want to be caught in the middle. And Cambodia, I mean, if you look at Cambodia on a map, give them the option. Which power should they be more friendly with? Maybe the one that is, in the region there. So, yeah, I think, we're seeing this with Vietnam, Singapore. The U.S. is really trying to get them to go against China, and they're just not falling in line. And the U.S. is having difficulty trying to find where they want to build their new network of long-range missiles that they want to put near China. So, yeah, I mean, this kind of I one thing I was worried about with the Biden administration, I thought they would be kind of better at this than the Trump administration, than Mike Pompeo. But it seems like they're kind of bungling it just as bad as he was.
Yeah, well, in more ways than that, the Biden administration, even for myself, who I feel like is, a real pessimist on, it really doesn't matter. The foreign policy isn't going to change from president to president. I thought some things would change a little bit between the two administrations, and we have seen very little. But you have another article here about Austin expected to hold first in-person meeting with Chinese defense minister. And David, talk a little bit about this, but what is, I guess, the overall status of the U.S.-Chinese relationship? On the past few months on the show, of course, everything's pretty much been focused on Ukraine. So have things gotten any better at all? Maybe the hostilities with Russia have provided some room for the Chinese issue to be on the back burner, then some talks to develop or something, or at least tensions de-escalate a little bit.
It doesn't seem like it. I mean, the Biden administration, while they're pouring all these resources into helping Ukraine, they're still saying that China is, the top priority. Blinken gave a speech to outline the Biden administration's China policy, and it was basically the same as Trump's, kind of focused on this alliance building in Asia to counter them. So, yeah, and of course we had Biden's comments on Taiwan. He said for the third time, I believe, that the U.S. would defend Taiwan if China invaded. The White House walked it back, but it was still, it was during this kind of high profile trip to Japan. It was his first trip to Asia as president when he said this. And this comes, with the backdrop of the U.S. Sending more and more congressional delegations to Taiwan and increasing, they're in trade talks now with Taiwan. They're talking about making a trade deal with Taiwan. So all this really angers China, as we've talked about a lot before. But yeah, no, there hasn't really been any de-escalation intentions. If anything, they're higher now than they've been. And Austin's going into this meeting with the Chinese defense minister, who's expected to ask him to clarify the Taiwan policy. And, they're supposed to, likely to discuss the South China Sea and those areas too. But I don't see any, anything big coming from this meeting. It's more just a way to kind of manage the high tensions.
And have you seen anybody in the foreign policy establishment like kind of scratching their heads and going, what the hell is the plan here? Can we really, fight Russia over Ukraine and China over Taiwan at the same time as we're trying to, again, enforce our will on all these specific nations and Cambodia as well? Or is there no idea that the U.S. may have to ever leverage some of its desired ways for the world to turn out to get other ones to happen?
I mean, yeah, it seems like it's either, the war in Ukraine shows us that we have to support Taiwan more and do both, or there are some, if we're talking mainstream establishment, there are some Republicans that are saying we should pull back from Ukraine and put more focus on Taiwan and make that kind of the priority. And, you would think it shows how just stupid it seems to me on the surface, unless there's something else behind it. But, when this war started and China was, buying more Russian oil, the U.S. kind of had talked to China and said, hey, don't support them militarily, which China never hinted that they would do. And don't help them skirt sanctions. But then right after that, the U.S. sanctioned a bunch of Chinese officials. So it just shows that the U.S. isn't changing that approach at all. And we're seeing this really kind of embarrass Biden with this Summit of the Americas that he's hosting in L.A. The Mexican president boycotted. He sent his foreign minister, I think. But, the symbolism of him not going because the U.S. didn't invite Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba, it's a blow to this whole front that they're trying to put on, that U.S. leadership is, bringing the region and the world together and like-minded countries, and they say all this crap, and then, you see how it, and the hypocrisy too. Now you have Biden planning to go meet MBS in Saudi Arabia. I just think a lot more countries are seeing through it. We talk about this. Biden keeps talking about how the world is standing up to Russian aggression. But if you look at China, there's a pretty significant portion of the world that isn't falling in line with the U.S. And China, India, Brazil, many African countries aren't. And India and China have really stepped up their purchase of Russian oil. And we're looking at the numbers. It seems like the Europe banning Russian oil, it's barely going to have any impact on Russia. Asia is already the top buyer of Russian oil now over Europe. So yeah, it just seems like they're just completely failing what they're trying to do. And again, it's tough to believe that it's just incompetence, because this is all very obvious stuff to me, but who knows?
Right. Well, one more article here before we wrap up, Dave. North Korea. You wrote this on the 7th and antiwar.com. U.S. warns a forceful response if North Korea tests nuclear weapon. And if we don't have enough countries in the world that we're trying to constantly battle with and, confront militarily, it looks like the Biden administration is really set on adding North Korea to that list. So what's going on recently with North Korea?
Yeah, so they've been testing a lot of ballistic missiles, launching them into the sea, and then earlier this week, you saw the U.S. and South Korea responded by doing the same thing. They launched 8 ballistic missiles into the sea off of South Korea's coast, which is the first time they did that recently. And it kind of signaled a more hawkish approach to North Korea now that the new president, Yoon, has come in, and he said he's going to take a harder line on North Korea and China, too. Um, and they keep warning now that North Korea is preparing for a nuclear test, which, who knows if that's true, but this kind of hawkish rhetoric now that was Wendy Sherman, the Deputy Secretary of State. That's probably going to provoke a response from North Korea. And, it seems like, Yoon wants U.S. nuclear weapons back in South Korea. And so things are looking like they're going to really escalate with North Korea now. And, it's the Biden administration's failure during the first year to, they say that they're open to talks with North Korea, but they never did anything to bring them to the table. They never offered sanctions relief or anything. They just continued this nothing policy, and it obviously didn't go anywhere. And now we're kind of facing these escalations.
Yeah. It definitely seems like they've kind of trapped themselves in another escalation cycle here with North Korea to add to the ones that they already have with Russia and China. Not to mention, they somehow managed to also botch the Iran negotiations, and it looks like that deal is only hanging by a thread here, Dave. So I don't know. Is there any reality in the Biden White House? Do you have any sense of what's going? Like, I feel like over time, you get a better idea of who's calling the shots in the White House, who has a lot of influence or power. It almost seems to me like everybody just has their little thing that they're doing, and there's no maybe central coordination. So Eli Ratner is out, dictating the China policy and really hawking it up. You got Victoria Nuland in Ukraine, and the leadership of the State Department, the National Security Council, the Pentagon are just willing to go along with everything. Or I don't know.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. It just seems like, neocons are running the foreign policy. And we saw some efforts by the Pentagon to kind of slow things down with Russia, but that all kind of failed. They were saying, oh, we shouldn't send certain weapons because it'll be an escalation. But now it seems like they're just going along with everything. So yeah, I mean, I don't know who's calling the shots exactly, but they're not doing a very good job.
All right, Dave, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Really appreciate it as always. People could find you at DeCamp Dave on Twitter, and pretty much every day at antiwar.com in the news section. And 4, 5, 6, sometimes more articles every day is what you're writing at antiwar.com. So a lot of good Dave DeCamp news stories for everybody to read. Dave, thanks so much for everything, and I'll have you back on soon.
All right, Kyle, thanks a lot.